Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on gross and net pay. Alright, so we actually talked about gross pay quite a bit last lesson. Alright, so gross pay is pretty much any money the employee pays you before deductions. Alright, so before all the taxes and all the not so fun stuff, that's the actual money you gain, right, that you earn. So things are like salaries, right? Your salary will include the money that you earn before all the taxes and stuff. Right? Could be things like hourly wage. Right? Could be your bonuses. It could be tips at a restaurant. It could be overtime pay. Right? So just anything that you earn before all the taxes, all the not so fun stuff. Now the net pay is the amount that you actually receive. Right? So net pay is different from gross. Right? Gross is pretty much just this is the default. Here's how much you earn. The net pay is how much it actually gets deposited into your checking account. Right? The money you actually receive in your bank account, that's net pay. So that's after all the deductions. Right? So the deductions are things like income tax, which we'll be talking about later. Right? Could be a pension plan. Right? In Canada, we call it the CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. We got insurance. That's employment insurance. Right? So you get some money back if you ever get fired or laid off. And another example is the medical. I don't know why I just capitalized the M. In Canada, we have the medical service plan. Right, all the healthcare and stuff. Right, that's the fee we have to pay for free healthcare. Okay, so for example, Jasmine here makes 60K gross pay in BC. Her taxes are this much. Her pension costs this, her insurance is that, and then the medical premium, so the fee you pay every year for your medical stuff is 900 every year. All right. So now, what's your monthly and bi-weekly net pay? Okay. So what we can do, all right. What we can do here is to go deduct everything. All right. So the gross here is 60K. The deductibles, all right. So all the things that she has to pay, and the chances are we also have to pay. All of us have to pay this. We got 10K something for income tax, 2K something for pension, EI, and a medical. Okay, so that's the amount of money she has to pay. So the net, so this is the money she actually receives in her checking account. Which is 45,000. Alright. So now which means that every month. So again, this is the money in a year. Divided by that by 12. So every month she will earn this much. And a bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks. Right, which is 1735. Remember, bi-weekly is just 52 weeks divided by 2, right? Okay. So here's a simple example. All right, next. Mr. C here receives a yearly salary of 42,640 from being an absolute buffoon in front of his students. All right, so there's a 10% performance bonus and 4% holiday pay on top of the salary. But there's 4,000 in taxes and 400 for pension every year. Okay, so let's find out what's his gross and net pay every week. All right, so This question specifically is looking for every week. Alright, so let's see. The salary per week. Alright, it's just that divided by 52, which is 820. Alright, so the bonus every week. Alright, is 10% of that. So $82 every week for the performance or for the bonus. And the holiday pay weekly. Alright, so a lot of places, instead of giving you holiday days, they give you a bit of money on top of each paycheck to kind of account for the money you would have earned while on the holiday day off. Okay, that's the holiday weekly. Okay, and then deductibles. Right, so we have 4,000 in taxes, and we got 400 for the pension. Divide that by 52, because both of those are in a year. You get 84.6. Okay, there we go. So now, the gross pay is just all the salary and bonuses added up. Right? That's the fun part. This is the part where this is the money that we would earn. Right? And of course, after taxes, it's a different story. Right, so we subtract that by the taxes and all the boring stuff. Which is 850. Right, there we go. Okay, let's do some more complicated stuff. So, let's say Mr. Cena has a 40-hour work week of $24.60 wage, flipping Krabby Patties at Krusty Krabs. Right? And now I average 5 hours of overtime per week at time and a half. That's like the typical overtime pay. And the taxes is a 20.6%. Right? And now the deductions for all the not so fun stuff is 4,300. But I do have some tax credits. It could be things like from university or like donations, right? Where if I were to either go to university or give money to charity, I get some tax credit. So this is essentially the taxes I don't have to pay. So now what's the net yearly income and a semi-monthly net pay? Okay, so a lot of information. Let's figure it out. Okay, so here's the base pay. Right, so it's 40-hour week at $24.6 every hour. And of course, 52 weeks in a year. 51,168. For overtime, right, I average 5 hours of overtime every week. So the overtime pay is 24.6 times 1.5. That's overtime. 5 hours of that. Of course, all that over 52 weeks. That's how much I earn overtime. Alright, so the gross pay before all the deductions Alright, so that's the gross pay. Okay, we'll highlight that for later. Okay, and then for taxes, or we also know deductibles. What? It was given to us as that the tax credits. So again, this is what we get from donating to charity and stuff. So we'll actually add this later. Right, so yeah, with tax credit, you don't really get this money back. It's just this is the amount of taxes you don't have to pay. Alright, so if you only pay $2,000 for taxes, you don't get the extra $39 back. Okay. Speaking of taxes, it's just going to be, what was it? 20.6%, right? Okay, that's everything we need. Right, things to add is the gross pay and the tax credits. Things to subtract is the deductibles and the tax. So the annual net. So we have the gross pay plus the tax credits minus the tax and minus the deductibles. So the total amount of money that goes right into my bank account is this much. Okay, and then the bi-monthly is just that number divided by 24, because it's twice a month. So each paycheck bi-monthly, I will get around 1,500. Okay, there we go. Right, complicated stuff, but that's part of life, isn't it? That's why I'm teaching all this. Speaking of taxes, you can it's kind of scary that I'm giving you all this blank space for calculating taxes, and there's a good reason for that. Taxes are complicated. That's why I'm here to teach you. Okay, so let's say you earn 120K. Right, so this is the tax as of 2026. Right, so there are two taxes we have to pay. There is the federal tax, right? So everyone pays this in Canada, and a provincial tax that's specific to each province. Okay, and now they are separated into tax brackets. Right, if this is a confusing part, if you earn 120K, right, it's not that because 120K is in between this little bracket here, it's not that you got 26% tax for all your salary, right? So we had to split it into separate brackets. So from the $0 to 58,000, right? So for the first, in the first bracket, all this money here in the first bracket is taxed at 14%. Right? So the first $58,523 you earn, that's taxed at 14%. Right, so that's how much you get taxed for your first 58,000. Now in the second bracket, right, the amount of money you earn here, that's specifically taxed at 20.5%. Right, so it's not like every single bit of money is taxed at the exact same time. Right, they're split into different sections. So the money you earn in this bracket, right, is taxed at 20.5%. So the money in this bracket, you pay 11,000 in taxes. Okay, how I got this number? Right, this is the total amount of money in this bracket. Right, this is the amount of money in this bracket. Right? So all the money you earn in this little section, in this level, is taxed at this percentage. And now lastly, in our third tax bracket, to up to how much you earn, which is 120,000. Right? This is where the big tax comes from, right? Because at 120,000, you're earning into this upper bracket now. Right? So but out of all this, you're only getting taxed 2,955 out of it because we only tax the amount of money inside this bracket. Right? In the third bracket, it's any money above 117,000. So it's up until how much you earn grossly, and that gets taxed at 26%. Right, just like that. Right, this is kind of nice because the reason why we actually have different tax brackets because if, for example, you didn't need to be taxed at 26% for all your money, it's very unfair. If let's say your annual salary is 118,000, right? If we do not have the tax bracket, if you are at this much money, you'll be taxing at 26%. Right? But if you are to earn 116,000, you'll only be taxed at 20.5%. Right? So it's kind of punishing for people who earn just slightly more in the tax bracket. And so that's why every single dollar in the tax bracket kind of counts towards that percentage. So the total in federal tax, we just add them up. Right, so this is federal tax. I will come back to that later. Okay, so we are using this one, this one, this one. Just add them up. Provincial now. Did I spell that wrong? I don't think there's an I in there. Provincial. See? Yeah, that looks about right. Okay. Exact same idea though. So the first bit. So the first 50,363 is taxed at is at 5.6%. Alright. Luckily, when you do taxes, it's all calculated for you, so you don't have to do this by hand. Right, but I'm just showing you this, all this by hand, just to kind of give you an idea of how everything's calculated. Right, this is 7.7%. Once again, we got this number because this is how much money is taxed inside this specific tax bracket, right? This is the money inside this tax bracket. Right, and then the last tax bracket that we have to pay, just like the earlier, is up to our actual salary. Right, we got 19,000 in this one now. You can see here, the tax brackets are vastly different, right? This is the bracket for the federal. That's a bracket. Oh, it's bracket for the provincial. Right. Oh, actually, here. Sorry, I missed this step here. So this is to 11. 648. Okay, let's see. How much is this one now? So we have this much taxed at 10.5%. Okay. Now the last tax bracket. Oops. Five, six, eight. That's at 12.29. That's a lot of decimals. I'm just gonna round this here. Okay. Now we just add it up. Okay, so we got this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. Okay. That's provincial. So now the big total. And we just add both of those up. That's a federal. That's a provincial. So if you were to earn 120K as your salary in BC, Canada, you have to pay 29,580. It's at 558. Let's just round up to one decimal. That's how many taxes that you have to pay. Right, it's definitely a lot. Right, but we do need taxes, so I can actually have funding for our roads and all that kind of stuff. Right, so paying taxes is important. I hate it, but obviously we still need taxes, so our society can function. Right, so remember, don't do tax evasion, kids. And yeah, that's it for today. A lot of taxes and deductions, all that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so with that being said, good luck practicing.